When I agreed to be the celebrant with Brian on this service, he kindly asked if I would like to offer a celebrant reflection. Since I knew the topic was Christianity and First Unitarian Church, I thought it would be a good exercise for me to think about it, and I said yes. The first thing I realized was that I was born a Christian. Now that may seem like a strange starting place, but it really is an important part of my journey. I was born into a family where my great-grandmother, my grandmother, and my parents, quote, religiously took me to church, now called Trinity United Methodist Church. It was a church that my great-grandparents had helped to found in the suburb of North Des Moines. I was immersed in the teachings of the Old and the New Testament and participated in all the rites of passage: baptism, Sunday school, church camp, confirmation, First Communion, youth group, choir, etc., etc., etc. This lasted until I left for college. I was even so connected I dated the minister's daughter. I was the poster child for the Methodist Church. Not only was I raised in a Christian family, I was raised in a Christian neighborhood and community. Sure, there was the occasional Jewish kid and a Catholic kid who were different, but they were still Christian. The fact is, the vast majority of the early program was at least superficially Christian. So when I say I was born a Christian, it's really an acknowledgement of the pervasive environment and programming that greeted me from my earliest days. And the truth is, I bought most of it because the teaching of the unconditional love as taught by Jesus resonated with me, and I even liked the stories and accepted many of the rules of the Old Testament. So what changed? Where has my journey taken me, and where am I today on the topic of being a Christian? I think ultimately the answer is not much has changed, but my consciousness, awareness, experience, and perspective are completely different. How did this nice poster child for Christianity end up in a Unitarian church? The short answer is it began by being a teenager, an age when I knew a lot more than I do now. More specifically for me, being a teenager at Grinnell in the 60s, an era where we were confronted with three major social issues: civil rights, women's liberation, and the war in Vietnam. I'd already begun to be disillusioned in high school with the hypocrisy of the adults in my church who talked all Christian principles on Sunday and seemed to ignore them the rest of the week. Little did I realize at the time, I too was a hypocrite, which I now choose to interpret as being a person who aspires to one set of values but is yet to fully realize them on a consistent basis. I also was having a hard time with the theology. God and Jesus were external to me, and even though I was a child of God, I felt no visceral connection. In addition, the whole miracle thing didn't track with my experience. The final blow was the reality of starving people, social injustice, man's inhumanity to man, and the horrors of war broadcast on the daily news. My rational mind took control, and I fell away from the church into my agnostic, if not atheistic, period. Fast forward to my 20s, early 20s, mid-20s, and early 30s. I was married to a nice Jewish girl who didn't feel connected to her religion. I was a nice former Christian boy who wasn't connected to his background. We started having children and decided we needed a faith community to give them to rebel against. The compromise choice was for a non-practicing Jewish girl and a non-practicing Christian was to try the Unitarian Church. It fit like a glove the first day I was here some 31 years ago. We met intellectually stimulating people. We were socially active, who were socially active and aware. The minister gave sermons that fit right into today's Psychology Today article, and we didn't have to deal with all that mumbo-jumbo creed stuff. I could be righteous about the hypocrisy of Christians who thought they had the answers as they misused religion to justify their behaviors, and had a lot of companions who shared my views. Fast forward again to my late 30s and early 40s. I was participating in a program called LifeSpring. It was a very intense personal development program that was deeply challenging my limiting belief system, while at the same time opening up my emotional being that had been dormant since my childhood. During this time, I began to have some experiences that I can only describe as mystical. One of them was to become enveloped in a ball of pure energy and love that was so overwhelming that I still don't have words to describe it. I had no body, there was no time, and all was perfect. Words fail me because I have no physical context to compare it to. These experiences were profound, but didn't fit with my rational understanding of the world and were out of my comfort zone. My rational mind spent a good 6 months trying to dismiss the experiences, but the reality was it had awakened a part of me that could no longer sleep. It started me on my spiritual quest that continues to this day. So how does this relate to today's topic of Christianity at First Unitarian Church? And where am I personally now? First, I would say that the umbrella of this community has allowed me to enter as an agnostic and transform into a deeply spiritual person who thinks that God is all that exists. I came believing that consciousness existed only because I was alive, and now I operate from the belief that life exists because consciousness exists. Furthermore, I have the choice of how much of that consciousness I choose to experience. In this journey, I've had the pleasure of knowing some of you for 30 plus years. I've been part of this church, and while we may not theologically see things in the same way, we have a bond which endures as we seek our truth. Second, I would say that I have evolved in my view of being a Christian. I decided that I had allowed others to define what being a Christian was and abdicated my connection to the teachings of Christ. While I reject the teachings that say I can only be saved by giving my life over to Christ, and that his primary message is that his crucifixion was necessary to cleanse me from my inherently sinful nature, I feel very comfortable claiming him as a divine example of who I am at my core. In my early days, God and Christ were external to me. Today, perspective is that they are inseparable. Finally, let me say, we as a community still have room to grow in our acceptance of those who differ from us, theologically and in other ways. We are still hypocrites, that is, people aspiring to one set of values while inconsistent in our application of them in our daily lives. Much of my spiritual journey has been outside of this church because I felt uncomfortable sharing it here for fear of judgment and rejection. That primarily reflects my personal insecurity, but also provides an opportunity for all of us to see where we can be more open and accepting. Thank you.